And let's go over to NBC News Chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles, who's following all this for us. Ryan, I know this is a ton to go through, but so far, what are the big top lines here? Like, what have we seen?
Well, it's a lot of photos, Gotti, and a lot of photos of very famous men who we knew had interacted with Jeffrey Epstein in the past. These are the first time we've seen some of these images. There's a whole lot of pictures of Bill Clinton, who, of course, has repeatedly said that he had no interaction with Jeffrey Epstein in terms of his criminal activity. But we also saw pictures of the pop star Michael Jackson. There's a photo of the billionaire Richard Branson and also the rock star Mick Jagger. And then there are just hundreds of thousands of pages of court documents, of media clippings and different articles. But in its aggregate, there isn't all that much that is really revealing the kind of, explosive information that I think many of the survivors and the victims of the Epstein controversy were looking for tonight.
Yeah, speaking of, like, what have we not seen, either because we haven't gotten to it yet or because it's redacted here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot that just is not showing up. And there are pages and pages of this material that are completely blacked out. And oftentimes in government documents that are released to the public, you'll see significant swaths of a page redacted. In some cases, there are entire PDFs in which the entire page of the PDF, each page of that PDF, is just a big black box. And so that's already raising questions from the members of Congress that demanded that this information be released. They want to know what is in those redactions, or at the very least, why the Department of Justice chose to redact that material. They've just provided very broad lines as to why they chose to redact certain things and not redact other things. So there's going to be a lot of questions from members of Congress as to how that decision process came to be, and whether or not some of that stuff can actually be made public in the spirit of the law.
And Ryan, these Clinton pictures, I mean, we see people's face blurred. We know that the DOJ had specific instructions only to redact victims or minors. We also know that there was talk about having the Clintons come testify in person about some of all this before Congress. Well, what is the latest on that?
So as it stands in terms of the congressional investigation, which is separate from this release of information from the Department of Justice, the House Oversight Committee did postpone the deposition that was supposed to take place this week. It's now scheduled to take place in early January. The Clintons have said that they do not believe that they are relevant witnesses in this investigation, that they knew nothing of Epstein's crimes, and that they should not be forced to answer these questions. Republicans on the House Oversight Committee disagree. They still believe that both Bill and Hillary Clinton should come in and be deposed, and that is scheduled for early January. Whether or not they show and run the risk of being in contempt of Congress is still an open question. But in a statement tonight, a Clinton spokesperson reiterated the fact that Clinton had nothing to do with Epstein and his crimes, and said that this is basically an attempt by the Trump administration to detract from the fact that they're not being fully transparent with the Epstein files.
As for the fact that this is not everything, and we know that it's not everything, despite that deadline being written into law, what are lawmakers saying about that?
Well, there are some, Gotti, that are outright saying that the Department of Justice is breaking the law. There are a number of aspects to this release that Congress specifically said needed to happen by midnight on Friday. First of all, they were explicit that everything had to be released by today. The Department of Justice already saying that it could take 2 weeks for this information to roll out. There was also a specific search function that had to be available to anyone that used the material. That initially didn't work. It does appear to be working on some level now. But Ro Khanna, who's one of the 2 members of Congress who pushed to have the law passed that required the Department of Justice to release this information, is raising serious questions as to whether or not there needs to be repercussions for how the Department of Justice is handling this. Take a listen.
What I'm calling for in terms of a constructive next step is for Todd Blanche or Pam Bondi to get in front of the country, to share the timeline for the full release, to share the explanations of the redactions, and to let the country know what they can expect. They have not been transparent, and that's why that's people's biggest concern on this, that they're hiding things.
And so whether or not that leads to Bondi or Blanche coming before Congress remains an open question. Keep in mind that Republicans still control the House. They are the only ones that have the ability to issue a subpoena to force Blanche or Bondi to appear in front of one of these committees and answer these questions. So both Kana and Massey, Tom Massey, who's the Republican who helped author that bill, said today that they do not believe the Department of Justice is complying with the release that we saw here tonight. Gotti.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.